to this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast, where we're talking sports entertainment, all with an eye on the bottom line. I'm Drew Goldfarb, joined by Taylor Smith. Rick Rockwell still has the day off. Let's start with football this week. We're going to begin with college football. Last week, we previewed the Big 12 Conference heading into the 2019 season. This week, our attention turns to the ACC. Oklahoma was the clear-cut favorite in the Big 12. The ACC, a similarly clear-cut favorite, the Clemson Tigers. Taylor, how good can Clemson be yet again this year?
Yeah, it'd be pretty big shock if they weren't right at the top again. You know, Trevor Lawrence is going to be a sophomore, and he's already one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best in the country. He's a Heisman hopeful. The biggest question mark with them is defensively. They only have 4 starters returning. They lost a bunch of guys to the NFL, but you know, the fact that their biggest threat in their division is probably Syracuse really tells you all you need to know. So, yeah, it'd be fairly shocking if they weren't in the playoff and by default winning the ACC again.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough to pick anybody else when Florida State had their worst season in 40-something years a year ago. I mean, that division is just – it's theirs. Trevor Lawrence could win the Heisman. I know that Tua is the front runner from Alabama, but I mean, it's got to be one of those two. If you're going to pick someone this far out, you're either going with Bama's QB or going Clemson's QB. Trevor Lawrence, I mean, geez, and the kid is like, what, 20, 19? He's outstanding. The Clemson Tigers are easily the class of their division. They won the Atlantic last year pretty handily. Syracuse finished in second place and were 2 games back. In the Coastal Division last year, things were a bit tighter. The Pitt Panthers won the division crown by a game over Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech opens the season with Clemson this year. Virginia, Miami, Virginia Tech, all within 2 games of Pitt at the end of the season last year. Does any team jump out from that division this year, forgetting Clemson in the other side for a moment? Is there a team that jumps out to you from that division?
No one really stands out. It's a quality division, kind of top to bottom, but there's not really a top-tier team. A lot of people are hyping up Virginia, but we'll see if they can actually get past Virginia Tech, who they haven't beaten since 2003. Miami's a little interesting. They should be solid defensively with their new head coach, but the offense has plenty of question marks. You mentioned Pitt as returning champions. They only have 10 starters on both sides of the ball total coming back, so that's pretty much an unknown team we have over there. Duke has a tough schedule, plus they just lost Daniel Jones to the NFL. Mac Brown's back at North Carolina, but they got a freshman QB there, and we'll see how that turns out. So, you know, there's a lot of unknown. It's going to be a dogfight. I think Virginia or Virginia Tech are the teams you would probably want to bet on. They just look like the least uncertain at this point. But if you want a little bit of a sleeper, I guess Miami is a little bit interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to say, oh, the U is back all the time, because there's a number of instances in the last decade where it's looked like the Hurricanes might be on their way back. You know, there were people last year predicting that the Canes were going to win 10 or more games and, you know, really challenge, and that wasn't the case. I mean, they have a new head coach, like you mentioned, Manny Diaz replacing Mark Richt, who retired. They've got a new QB, and that might be the key, is Tate Martell transferred from Ohio State. If he can play to a really high level, I don't know that the division that they're in is strong enough where, you know, good play from their QB and keeping everything else constant might not just be enough. Not going to be enough to face Clemson, but or to beat Clemson in the conference championship game. But, you know, Miami's one of those teams where they're always one that I would love to pick to win that division every year or most years. But they're one of those teams where it's like it's never their year. It always looks like it might be their year, but it's never actually their year.
Yeah, their year hasn't been their year since 2002 or 2001.
Pretty much. Since they joined the ACC and everybody was going, man, we're going to get Florida State, Miami in the ACC championship game every year. We are yet to get it Florida State, Miami in the ACC championship game any year because Miami wasn't good while FSU was up, and then FSU backed down a bit, and Miami still isn't even really that up at this point. But We agree that Clemson's going to win the ACC for the 5th straight season. But will they also qualify for the college football playoff for the 5th straight year as well? They won the national championships in 2016 and 2018, finished in 2nd place in 2015, and lost a semifinal game in 2017. By the way, both playoff losses came to Alabama, with the Tide winning the national championship both times. And both national championship game wins for Clemson came over Alabama. So this might be the best non-in-conference rivalry in the nation in the last 5 years at this point. So, Taylor, will the Tigers make it 5 straight appearances in the playoff, and will we get another Clemson-Alabama matchup in the postseason?
I like the chances of that. I like Clemson's chances of making it more than I like the chances of that rematch. But if you look at their schedule, there's really nothing there. The conference schedule speaks for itself. They have Texas A&M out of conference at home, I believe. So that's not the most daunting matchup either. Assuming Trevor Lawrence stays upright, and if the defense can actually, hold up with all the new faces, I think they'll be fine. So yeah, I wouldn't bet against them making the playoff at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to be in. We went over it in the last video when we were talking about the Big 12, where Bama's a lock barring something really unforeseen happening. Clemson's a lock, and then Ohio State, Michigan, one of them should get in, and Oklahoma should get in, but, everybody will make a case for Georgia, against the Sooners. There isn't a team out of conference that should even hang with the Clemson Tigers this year. Texas A&M you mentioned, and it's like, this isn't Johnny Manziel's Aggies. I don't see it. I don't see there being any reason to pick against the Tigers. And I like the idea of their chances of, if Bama and Clemson are the 1 and 2 seed, I at the very least like Clemson's chances to win a playoff game to get back to the national championship again. They're a team it's kind of like Alabama. You pick them until they prove you wrong. They've been that good to make the college football playoff 4 years in a row, to face Alabama in the college football playoff 4 years in a row, and either have Clemson or Bama win the national championship in all 4 of those years. I wouldn't bet against either of those teams at this point until they're mathematically done. And even then, I would just think they'd go like, I know Bama's 9-3, but, their losses came to great SEC teams like Mississippi State, Tennessee.
They still get in, yeah.
LSU, yeah.
You could go 500 and probably still get in. It's Alabama.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but in that case, they'd be the 4 seed with Georgia being a 1 seed and LSU in, and they'd sneak, Florida or Ole Miss or Arkansas or something, because that's what everybody really wants is a national
SEC tournament.
Another SEC tournament. Yeah. In truth, I would not be opposed to an SEC championship conference tournament to lead to the SEC championship game. Like if they wanted to do away with 2 of those garbage non-conference games, I wouldn't be opposed to every conference doing that. Do away with trash Wofford games and Sanford and
all the Ford schools can go away. Yeah.
Right. Get rid of those and let's play like the top 4, play a divisional championship game and a conference championship game. Let's see that, because then we do get a rematch of Alabama, LSU or something like that, and then an Alabama, Georgia. And at that point, there's no question as to who the best team in each conference is in the country, because they would have played everyone in their division once, the second best team in their division twice, and the best team in the other division. So
makes too much sense. Yeah. Makes too much sense for college football to consider.
Hey, no, the NCAA makes all of their decisions based on logic and what is fair.
All right.
Give me 25,000 examples of where I've been wrong from the last year and a half. We don't have time for that. You could, but we don't have time. And that's because it's time to talk NFL. 2019 NFL preseason begins the same night that we're recording this with the annual Hall of Fame game. Taylor has been writing team-by-team previews on gamblingsites.org, recently wrapping up the AFC East. Today, we're going to preview both East divisions, but we can start with the AFC. The New England Patriots, obviously the favorites there. How many games will Tom Brady and company be able to win this year without Rob Gronkowski?
So the over-under I'm seeing is 11.5. I'm going to take the over there pretty much every time. The schedule is not super easy, but They do play in the AFC East, so that's a minimum, you think, of 4 wins, and realistically 5 or 6. That's not out of the question. That division is absolute garbage as usual. They have some difficult games. They get Dallas, they get Houston, but they always beat Houston. They get Pittsburgh in the first game of the season. They play the NFC East. So Philly and Dallas are tough games, but they also get Washington and the Giants, which should be wins. It's the Patriots, assuming Tom Brady doesn't suffer some massive decline, which at this point, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. It seems like he's just going to keep doing this forever, considering how many times I and others have written them off and look like idiots in the process. I'm just going to stop doing it. So 11.5, the schedule's easy enough in the beginning of the year to where they could realistically start 8-1 or 7-2. They have a week 10 bye. The schedule gets tougher after that, but if they do go 8-1, they just have to go 4-3 the rest of the way just to get the over. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. So I'm taking the over. I don't want to bet against the Patriots at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down, I was looking through their schedule. I know that they open with Pittsburgh, and traditionally that would be a challenging game. And obviously Roethlisberger had a really good season last year, but they're not quite the same team that they were a year ago. They've traded a piece or two. The challenges that I marked down at Miami in week 2, only because the Dolphins always play up against the Patriots, at least one of the two, usually the game in Miami. And when it's a September game in Miami, that's also going to add to it. There's at Philly in week 11, home against Dallas in week 12. They host the Kansas City Chiefs in week 14. And I'm not going to count hosting the Browns in week 8. I know that some people might want to be, the Browns. They're not going to challenge the Patriots. Watch them. Actually, that'll be like their first win. The Browns will start 0-7, and then they'll beat the Patriots and end 9-7 or something. But, yeah, I'm taking the over for wins for New England. Tom Brady is, I grew up a Dolphins fan, so it's really hard for me. For a number of years, I've been able to make the case that Dan Marino is still the greatest quarterback of all time in the NFL because he was that much better than everybody else that he ever played with, quarterback-wise. Within his era, there was nobody close to him. Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. There's no question about it at this point. With all of the Super Bowl rings, all of the appearances, the consistency, the fact that he's doing it at this age, which, I mean, what other quarterback has been able to pull it off even close to this age? Brett Favre fell off. Marino didn't have his best, although he had a garbage team around him in the late 90s. But Peyton Manning, but, I mean, he wasn't quite at the level that Brady's been at. I mean, it really pains me to say it. After watching Brady just destroy my Dolphins for 18 years, or, we'll always have last year's game, though, in Miami. Watching Gronkowski faceplant at the goal line was Miami Miracle. Anyway, I'm just going to remember that instead of watching them destroy the Dolphins in week 2. But let's go to the NFC East, where the Philadelphia Eagles are the betting favorites. Dallas Cowboys feel like the only true threat to Philly this season in that division anyway. Do you see this as a 2-team race as well, or are you picking a surprise when it comes to the G-Men or the Redskins?
Absolutely not. This is definitely a 2-team race. Football has parity, so there's always some team that's going to rise up, but I just can't see it being New York or Washington. Both potentially have rookie quarterbacks. I don't imagine Eli's going to last the whole season. But, I guess he has to this point, so we can't fully write that off. But it's Philadelphia or Dallas. Dallas, I imagine, will get Zeke back before the season starts. I can't imagine that holdout lasting into the season. He's too important to them. The schedules are pretty tough. They play the NFC North this year, which is brutal, except for Detroit, theoretically. Both teams have tough one-off games. The Cowboys play at New Orleans, and they get the Rams later in the season. Philadelphia takes on Atlanta on the road in week 2. So it's not the easiest schedule for either team, but some team has to win this division. I like Philly there a little bit. Carson Wentz should be fully healthy again. Assuming he can get back to close to his MVP level from a couple of years ago. I think that's still the best team on paper in the division. I'd take Philly, but, if you want to take Dallas, I wouldn't talk you out of that either.
Yeah, I agree with you on it. The holdout is kind of the biggest thing for the Cowboys at this point, but that's going to end. As you said, he's too important for them to not pay up, essentially. And they will, and he'll play. He'll be there week 1. It'll be fine. Dak Prescott, obviously an interesting bit of I don't want to call him a wild card, but a little bit. Carson Wentz, now the guy in Philly with Foles signing with the Jaguars. So, I mean, I'd pick the Eagles in this situation as long as they can stay healthy, especially at the quarterback position. Dallas is not a bad pick, but I kind of feel like they're always their odds are never truly reflective. Although the Eagles kind of suffer that same thing because the fan base is so ravenously in support of them and kind of seeing them as a little bit better than they actually are. But yeah, I think that both of these teams probably make the playoffs. One of them will end up with a division win. The schedules are interesting, though, when it comes to both of these teams with the other divisions and the one-offs and that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see where they can finish record-wise, the one that doesn't win the division. That'll be I think the most interesting thing of that race. I mean, obviously, one of them will win the division. There's no way the Giants can do it. I don't see Washington doing it. So it's those two. And the other one, as long as they aren't faltering too much against their non-divisional schedule, should be a playoff team as well. So the Patriots, obvious Super Bowl contenders. I don't think we really need to get into depth as to why New England should be considered a favorite in the AFC. But are the Eagles or Cowboys or both legitimate contenders in the NFC to represent that conference in the Super Bowl?
I don't think we can ever really write off Philly at this point. They won it 2 years ago. They made it last year despite Wentz being in and out, basically. They lost their insurance policy with Nick Foles going to Jacksonville, but if Wentz is healthy, I don't see why they can't contend. I'm less into Dallas. I just don't think Dak Prescott is necessarily a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. He's good. He's certainly a great value for a 3rd or 4th round pick, whatever he was, but that team is really reliant on Zeke, and if he gets hurt, which is very possible, then they don't have much depth there at all. I don't necessarily trust them to get there on the arm of Dak Prescott with a middling receiving core. So I just don't see it. The NFC is pretty tough on paper. Philadelphia, I would take way before I would take Dallas. But yeah, New England's obviously a team not worth really talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if I would truly bet on the Eagles to make the Super Bowl from the NFC. It's too deep in the Eagles, I think, with Dallas I'm not picking. They're kind of in that boat where they're one of those teams where everybody thinks every year that they might break out and they might be back. It's like when we were talking Miami a minute ago. Everybody wants to think that the Canes are back. Everyone wants to think the Cowboys are back. They are yet to be back.
They're never back.
They're never back. It's been over 20 years. Right? They haven't been a Super Bowl since Super Bowl 30. Am I?
No, 1996 or whatever.
Yeah. They played Pittsburgh, I think. Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin.
Guys that have been gone for well over a decade.
Right. Oh, way beyond that. Yeah. Because we're talking about we're nearing the 25th anniversary of the last Cowboys Super Bowl. I don't think that they are back yet. They haven't really shown an ability to be one of the best teams in the NFC. I'd much more quickly buy into the Eagles doing that. I still don't know that I would buy them before I'd buy some of the teams from the other divisions, which we'll get to in the coming weeks. But that's kind of my thing. I'm definitely not a buyer on the Cowboys. Might consider a flyer on the Eagles, but they wouldn't be my favorite. Let's get to baseball. MLB trade deadline has now passed. Make sure to check out our latest edition of Betting for the Cycle for more on that. So let's talk futures. Taylor, which team made the biggest move towards a playoff push or a World Series push at the trade deadline? And I know you're not being a homer when you say what I know you're going to say.
Yeah, the biggest move by far was Greinke, but the Astros were a team I was already on to begin with to make the World Series, if not win it. So, adding Greinke just makes them unfairly rich in the rotation. So it's kind of a cop-out to say that. I think another team that made a push for a playoff spot could be Cleveland. I think they kind of took something they had in starting pitching that was a pretty deep resource for them. They moved Trevor Bauer to get 2 big right-handed bats, Franmil Reyes and Yasiel Puig. They're only 3 back of the Twins as of this recording. They're very much in both that and the wild card race. They're getting Danny Salazar back on the day of this recording. Mike Clevenger's here. Corey Kluber's going to come back at some point. Shane Bieber's been arguably the best pitcher in the American League for a while now. So that team has plenty of pitching. I don't see any reason they shouldn't have done what they did. Their outfield needed bats. They got them. So I think that's the team that made the biggest push toward the playoffs. A bunch of other contenders just made middling moves. The Yankees didn't do anything. The Red Sox added a middling back of the rotation starter and a Cashner a few weeks ago. Tampa Bay did a few things, but nothing big. So as far as teams that are kind of in the playoff hunt, Houston's already on top. They're going to make it. Cleveland, among the teams that's lower in the standings, I think they're the team that made the biggest move.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to argue when they get Reyes and Puig at the deadline. And it did cost them a very good pitcher, but as you said, that's something they've got a plethora of. So they gave up a piece that they could afford to, and they got 2 pieces that should solidify their lineup and help them with their push. I'm trying to look in the National League too, and the Braves made a couple of acquisitions. The Giants didn't trade Bumgarner, which is a good non-move for a team that seems to think they're going to be in contention. The New York Mets acquired a solid, upper middle level starting pitcher in Marcus Stroman. They opted not to trade Wheeler. They did not trade Syndergaard. They also didn't really help their bullpen. They didn't really help the lineup. So, the Mets are not really contenders, I don't think. I'd be thrilled if they were.
They could be. Like, among the teams that's, they're in 4th in their division right now, but they're not going to win the division. They're 11 back, but
no.
They've won 6 in a row. They're kind of closing in the wild card. They have the talent. They have the pitching. I don't think it's insane. They just might have dug themselves too deep a hole.
It's not insane if their starting pitching can go 8 innings a game. It's getting from the starters to the end of the 9th that is the issue for me with the Mets. They've obviously got a Rookie of the Year candidate playing first base in Pete Alonso. They've got their 5-man rotation on paper may be the best, one of the best in Major League Baseball, aside from the Astros. The Astros have the best 1, 2, 3. But when you look at the Mets and you go 1 through 5, I don't know many playoff teams that can boast DeGrom, Syndergaard, Wheeler, Stroman, Matz, that kind of a caliber of rotation. I'm still not confident. Maybe it's because I grew up a Mets fan and I know better. But Atlanta's going to run away with that division. They did acquire a couple of pieces for bullpen help, so I think they solidified what they needed to. They got Dallas Keuchel earlier in the year off of free agency. They're a very good team already. So I don't know that they necessarily needed a lot of pieces. As you got into, I was disappointed that the Yankees and the Dodgers didn't really make much of any move. I don't know if the Dodgers needed to, but, the Yankees did, and they didn't do anything. So, it's interesting. I think obviously it's very obvious that Houston made the most of the trade deadline of the teams that are currently in a playoff position. I think the Mets are interesting that they believe that they're going to be contenders this year. And yeah, they're actually only about 5 games back of the wild card. The problem for them is that there's 6 teams between them and a wild card spot. They're in 4th in the division. Washington and Philly are ahead of them. Whichever team loses the tiebreaker between the Cubs and Cardinals in the Central, as well as the Brewers, are ahead of them. And from the NL West, the Giants are ahead of them. So
yeah, and the Diamondbacks. So it's not that they're way back in the standings, but the biggest problem for the Mets is that they've got so many teams to claw their way past that that's why I just don't see it happening. But again, I'd rather be pleasantly surprised as a Mets fan than do what I typically do and set myself up for disappointment, but being like, man, if you look at that rotation, there's always 2020.
There's always 2020 until they trade both Wheeler and Syndergaard this offseason.
And then there'll always be 2024.
There will always be 1986 and 1969. That's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to. And
If
there
you
should have been
squint, you can see
2006
those.
except for injuries, but I don't want to start crying on
2015.
2015 was good, and then there was a bunch of errors, and basically they just stopped playing defense, and their bullpen blew up against the Royals. The Royals were a really good team. I'm not taking anything away from the 2015 Royals, but I mean, if they gave up an inside the park home run in the first inning of the first on a ball that they just misplayed in the outfield. Like, this wasn't some weird cavernous, it got caught on a hill like in Houston where they used to have, or some kind of triangle it bounced around. It wasn't like Fenway Park where it could have gotten caught somewhere. It was, I think the left fielder just misplayed it, like overshot it, and it went past him to the wall, and the center fielder wasn't sprinting for it. But anyway, the Dodgers, the clear-cut favorites in the National League. Their betting odds have been fluctuating between plus 100 even money or even at minus 110 recently to win the NL pennant. The trade deadline now behind us by about 24 hours as we're sitting here. Is there any team that might be in a position to beat LA? I know that on Betting for the Cycle, you've been picking the Dodgers since we started that show. Is there a team that you see as a legitimate threat to the Dodgers before the World Series?
Atlanta's a team that they've pretty clearly been the second best team in the NL pretty much all year long. But I think the team that is the biggest threat and at least makes the most sense in a short postseason series would be Washington. If you look at the top of their rotation, their 1, 2, 3 is arguably right there with LA's and Houston's. You know, you got Scherzer and Strasburg, who are Cy Young candidates every year. Patrick Corbin would be a number 1 in most rotations, I think, and he's their number 3. And there's still talent in that lineup. You know, they lost Bryce Harper, and people were like, well, they're toast, especially after last year when they were so underwhelming. But they've been legitimately good this season. I think they kind of got off to a rickety start, which kind of screwed them in the division. But they're in second right now. They're in good position for a wild card spot. That team is known for their postseason failures in the past, but the talent is there, and that kind of starting pitching is pretty daunting when you start talking about Scherzer game 1, Strasburg game 2, Corbin, and then maybe Strasburg again in game 5 or game 4. You know, like that goes right up there against Kershaw and Buehler and Ryu in the National League. I think the Dodger depth is still too much, but if I were to take a flyer on another NL team, I think it'd be them.
The biggest issue I would have is that you never know what's going to happen in one game. What's that?
Their bullpen's also horrible, so that's a thing.
Yeah. Again, it kind of goes back to if they could pitch 8 innings a game, then you're good. And come playoff time, what are you saving their arm for? But picking a wild card team for me, when they've got that one game play-in, is a risky thing to say that might be the only threat, because you never know what's going to happen in the one game. The better team doesn't always come out on top. You could have Washington versus the Cardinals or the Cubs, and who's to say the Nats would even come out of that? I don't think they're going to challenge the Braves in the division. So I would have a hard time picking them simply because it's almost a coin flip that they'd even advance to a series, much less then challenge LA. The Braves are the team that I've been picking for the last month or so, basically since Dallas Keuchel got picked up, where I thought that kind of solidified them in my mind, where it added that one piece where we know the kind of pitcher that Dallas Keuchel can be, and that by the time he was warmed up, they would be in a good position in the standings. They're leading the East right now. They may end up being able to get that first round matchup against the NL Central's winner instead of having to face a team like LA. So to be able to face the Cardinals or the Cubs in round 1, I think gives them a better shot at being in a position to beat LA. Because if you're going to pick a wild card team, I think it's too tricky to say which team would come out of the wild card, much less even qualify for the wild card position right now, the way the National League's been stacking up. So that would be my hesitation on Washington, because I agree with you. Their rotation, their top 3 is fantastic. And yeah, they were a bit underestimated with their lineup after losing Bryce Harper to Philly. it would be funny if Washington advanced further in the postseason than the Phillies did, with Harper going from Washington to Philly, especially if they were able to like beat a team like the Dodgers. Whether or not they went to the World Series after that wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But I would just hesitate to pick a wild card team as being the team simply because.
Yeah, I think that's a really good argument for sure. And I think picking against the Dodgers is probably just kind of – it's super risky in the first place. I mean, they've made it twice in a row. They're arguably better than they were last year already. So the one thing with them is the bullpen. Again, people thought they were going to add Felipe Vasquez or somebody like that, but they didn't. That hasn't haunted them either of the last 2 years. They almost fell short last year against the Brewers, but talent ultimately won out there. They've been the best team in the league, I think, by far. So, yeah, it's either the Braves or, I guess, Washington. I don't really see anyone else rising up.
That I agree with you on. The American League frontrunners, Houston and the Yankees. When I wrote this question down, as I just threw my pen, I wrote this probably 20 minutes before the trade deadline yesterday. So I'd written neither the Astros nor the Yankees made huge moves, but the Cleveland Indians did by trading Trevor Bauer to Cleveland or to Cincinnati. Obviously, that changed in the seconds surrounding 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Zach Greinke makes Houston an incredible front runner in the American League. Did Cleveland do enough by getting those two big bats, or are the Yankees good enough already to muddy that pick even the slightest bit? Because it seems like, and when we were talking yesterday to do betting for the cycle, you, me, and Jim now are all in agreement that the Astros are the team to pick in the American League. Is there enough talent on that Yankees roster, or did the Indians move to get help in their lineup do enough to even warrant true consideration or the ability to say that the AL playoff picture is even a little bit muddied before the World Series?
I think it's definitely muddied just because the top of the AL still has more talent than the top of the NL. Houston I see as a minus 110 favorite now at my bookie, which is crazy. But the Yankees still have tons of talent. There are question marks, obviously. James Paxton's not been very good after being an ace the last few years with Seattle. I don't know what's going on with Luis Severino. I imagine he's going to come back at some point, but even if he does, who knows what they're going to get out of him. I think he's a top 5 pitcher in the league when healthy, but he's been out all year. You can't really depend on that. I'm willing to write off Cleveland, I think. I don't really buy them to begin with. I just think they don't have as much talent as the other teams. And I don't think you can totally write off Boston either. They've been playing pretty well lately, but, it's still the same team for the most part that stormed their way through the AL last season. So there's still part of me that wants to believe they're going to figure it out at some point. They looked the part over the weekend against the Yankees. We'll see how it goes this weekend in New York. But I don't think you can say the Astros – you can say they're favorites. I just don't think they should be minus favorites at all. I don't think any team should be a minus favorite. I get why they are, but, if you look at the Yankee lineup, if they do get healthy, it's still right there with Houston's as far as depth and just power potential. And the Yankees, I think, on balance of all the names in the bullpen, still probably do have the slightly better bullpen than Houston. So, the top 3 in the rotation is unmatched for the Astros, but I definitely wouldn't be betting on them at minus 110 because that's just ludicrous. And I think that the Yankees there's still a path for them. And, plus 180 or whatever they are now, plus 200, something like that. That's something I'd be willing to take as far as the AL pennant goes. And you also have Minnesota still lurking.
That's true. And I agree with you on it. I'd never take a team to win the pennant at minus 110 or minus anything. I wouldn't do it for the Dodgers. I wouldn't do it for the Astros. And it's incredible because my bookie took down the pennant odds on trade deadline day. So this way they would adjust. The last ones I had seen before they removed it, the Astros were at plus 150, which was much more reasonable. especially when you've got to go through the Yankees, you've got to go through the Indians, you've got to maybe go through the Twins. You know, you could have to go through the Athletics, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, the Rays, the Red Sox, competitive. There are a lot more teams, I think, that have a shot that you could legitimately say, if this team starts playing well in late September, they're going to be a legitimate threat to at least make some noise in the playoffs. There are a lot more of those teams, I think, in the American League than there are in the National League. So I would never take the Astros at -110. I do think that they are pretty much a clear-cut favorite to win the American League. The Yankees do have a lot of talent. They needed some pitching help. They didn't trade for it. They've battled injury issues all year. Not that they couldn't get healthy at the right time. The Red Sox are an interesting one because they're kind of an enigma wrapped in a riddle where they should be so much better than they are now, and they always do just enough so that you don't want to write them off entirely. We talked about that a week ago, where this stretch of games where they're playing the Yankees 8 times and the Rays 6 times in the span of 2 weeks is kind of a bit of a make or break, and they seem like they're going to be somewhere around a little over 500 in those games, which is like the bare minimum to consider them still alive, at least in my eyes.
Yeah.
Like splitting those games would be like, oh, you know what? They're hanging in there. If they lose more than they win, it's okay. They're probably now starting down that hill. But I think Cleveland, the move that they made in moving Bauer to Cincinnati and getting Puig and getting Reyes, I think that helps them and makes them at least a bit more of a solid challenger. I don't think they're going to really compete with the likes of Houston, especially after adding the pitching they brought in. The Yankees are always scary because they're the Yankees, and if you look at their lineup on any given day and you realize it's not the all-star team, it's actually just their, Thursday starters. It is more muddied, I think, in the American League than the National League because there is so much talent. But I still do think that just like the Dodgers are clear-cut in the NL, I think that the Astros might be similarly clear-cut in the AL. There are more teams that could take them down, but I think they stand the same chance at doing so as a team does of taking down the Dodgers in the National League. Now, I know that you want to talk some European football. Rip can't stand soccer, but he's not here this week, so let's talk about it. It's August. That means soccer campaigns all over Europe get underway this month. Manchester City have won the Premier League in back-to-back seasons. The Sky Blues check in as heavy -185 favorites to three-peat. Those odds from Bovada. Will Man City make it 3 straight titles this year?
They obviously can. I think -185 is a little bit rich, though. They only won the league by 1 point last year. The season went down to the final day. They edged Liverpool by that 1 point. Liverpool just won Champions League. They are pretty much the same team we saw last season for the most part. The attacks are the 2 best in England. I think it's a 2-horse race, just like we talked about earlier with the NFC East, for example. But if you're going to bet on it, you should definitely be taking Liverpool at +285. They're pretty much neck and neck. The value is just way better on the Reds than the Sky Blues. So I don't really understand why they're -185. I know they're back-to-back champions, but just based on last season alone, Liverpool have had the head-to-head edge when they've actually played each other. So a few bounces one way or the other, Liverpool won the league last year, and they're probably favorites. So, yeah, if I'm going to bet on it, I'd definitely take Liverpool.
We have a similar story in Spain. FC Barcelona listed as massive -160 favorites to win a 3rd straight La Liga crown. Real Madrid not far behind, +175. Will Barcelona or Real win the Spanish top flight for a 6th straight year?
So they both look better than they were last year. Real Madrid last summer lost Ronaldo. They did not replace him with anybody, really. This year they got Eden Hazard from Chelsea. He's instantly their best player, I think, and that instantly makes them a legitimate contender. But you look at Barcelona, they added Antoine Griezmann from Atletico Madrid. They still have probably the most daunting attack in the world. They still have Lionel Messi in there. If they can sort it out, they have definitely a surplus of attackers in that lineup, which is a little bit concerning. But I think it's it obviously makes sense to bet on either of them. Atletico themselves, though, they use that Griezmann money to fortify the roster with guys like Joao Felix, Marcos Llorente, and Mario Hermoso. So that's a deep team. I don't know if they have enough high-end talent to compete with Real or Barca. So I would take Barca again, I think, but the minus odds don't really make it an easy bet. So if you want value, I guess Real Madrid's probably the pick.
Final stop on our European football road trip here. We're going to Italy. Juventus once again favored to win Serie A. Juve has won this league 8 years in a row. Odds makers have them at minus 175 odds to make it 9 straight. Kind of funny that they have shorter odds to win their 9th straight than Man City would to win their 3rd straight. But anyway, minus 175. Is this the year, though, that Italy finally crowns a new champion, or are we nearing the decade mark?
It's really hard to bet against Juventus. Ronaldo's older, but he's still kind of near the peak of his powers. They've added some talent this season, in defense particularly. I think Napoli and Inter Milan make for interesting value bets, but betting against Juventus was 8 straight Serie A titles just seems like a foolish endeavor at this point. So I don't hate the value, like I said, on Napoli or Inter, if you want to take a shot on that, but it's like kind of like the Patriots, just betting against Juve just seems like a dumb idea.
One more quick question for you before we wrap up, and that is, if we're playing FIFA, which team do you either try to get assigned to if you're doing like a career mode, or do you have a go-to team to play with? Because I'm just kind of curious. We were talking about this is kind of like the ultimate like friendly game or game to play with other people. So do you have a go-to team on it? Because I'm just kind of curious.
I would say Liverpool. People are going to flock to Juventus just because they have Ronaldo and he's ridiculously unstoppable in the game. Barcelona speaks for themselves. But if you go with Liverpool, it's kind of a lesser, not as popular team. They still have tons of speed, which is really the name of the game in FIFA. So it's like picking the Yankees if you pick Juventus. It's just kind of lame. So, I always kind of raise my eyebrow at people that just take the easy out with Juve. So I'll say Liverpool there.
See, it's funny because I usually do the career mode thing if I'm playing. So, and I just get randomly assigned to whatever because I'll start in some small thing. And I'm pretty sure the last one I played, I got my contract purchased or sent to Everton. So I guess that'd be a nice little rivalry.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have like an allegiance one way or the other, but that's kind of
Merseyside derby there.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know that I would, if you're picking Liverpool to play in a game, if I'm going up against you, that I'm going Everton.
Everton,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, I might go with a different European team. I might go, I don't know, FC Barcelona. Yeah, I'm just going to do that. Just like, you're like, I don't know if I'd pick it's like picking the Yankees. I'd pick them.
That's fine, yeah.
I'm trying to win. I'm not trying to, compete.
Play fair, yeah. That's
right.
a good point.
I'm going to give myself the best possible odds of beating you if we're playing some FIFA. So we might have to do that in a little bit. But for now, that's going to do it for this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast. Make sure to check out gamblingsites.org for more from him right here. He is Taylor Smith. I'm Drew Goldfarb. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time for another edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast.